All right, everybody, it is minutes after the hour. We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to today's webinar, Return to Meeting Rooms in the New Normal, preparing for the return to the office. We have a great presentation for you guys today. Be about 45 minutes of talk time. We're going to leave about 10 to 15 minutes for you guys for questions at the end. So if you have questions, please drop them into the questions panel and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Likewise, we know a lot of people ask about this, so I want to let you guys know in advance. We will be recording this session and you guys will all be getting a replay of the recording in the coming days. So if there's anything you miss or if there's anything that you guys want to have access to be able to reference again, we'll get that to you as well. So with that, let me present to you today's co-presenters. First, we have Aaron McCardle, CEO of Room Ready and also co-founder of Room Ready. He is a serial problem solver, serial entrepreneur, and just a person who likes to understand the common frustrations of meeting rooms and try to bring unique perspectives to the ways to problem solve these issues. So great, Aaron's going to be here to provide some great insights, and we're excited about what he's going to say. And joining him is Nick Gillisy, 7-year Technion vet, most recently as a senior systems designer when he was with Technion, currently the co-founder of Modus ID, industrial designer by trade with a specific furniture design focus, but also his passions include environmental graphics, IT, consumer products, and houseware. So a guy who's going to be able to speak a lot to the furniture side and everything in between. So with that, guys, I'm going to stop talking and let Aaron and Nick lead the presentation for you.
Unmute, Aaron.
We'll talk about what return to work likes. We're going to have a conversation about that for a little while. Our teams have prepared a short checklist of things we thought might be important and might bring value to you. And then obviously we'll talk a little bit about what we think is relevant when you're looking for a partner as you're trying to navigate the return to work. We're going to start with this quick poll. You guys should be seeing it on your screen here pretty quickly, if not already. And if you could go ahead and answer that briefly for us, it'd be great feedback. We're actively asking all our customers, polling them every time we get on a call or have an opportunity to, and ask what their strategy is. We thought this might be a good piece of information we could share back with the group as well. Seems like the answers we're getting are across the board. All right, as you guys are answering that, Nick and I will just jump in. Our team has put together this list of, just quickly, this list of things we should think about and talk about as we return to work. Everything from technical solutions, right, of what technology is in the buildings and how we're going to use that, to social and obviously social distancing, cultural changes on how we work. Nick, what have you heard from your customers as you start to talk about what their return to work strategy looks like?
I can divide all of our conversations into an even half between short and long-term considerations. Out of this list apply to many of these things. Social distancing, for example, people talking about spacing people apart using existing furniture without having to do a lot of new investment. Meeting room usage and how you're sharing between what are disparately grouped people, some they're present, some that are far away. And then the sanitation aspect, just a lot of talk about materials, current materials on surfaces that are high touch versus low touch, and how to reduce high touch surfaces or make them easier to clean or quicker. And each one of these things feeds into long-term considerations when we talk about product development versus outfitting furniture into offices today. The sanitation genie has been let out of the bottle, so how we look at developing furniture from this point on is never going to go back. It's, you know, reduction of surfaces, reduction of crevices, any place where things can get trapped. And if things can get trapped in a space, how do you clean them?
Yeah, it's all about making people feel comfortable, really. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. We have all these, you talk about the different perceptions of the issue, you know, nationwide, and then you bake in layers of company culture into that. And what people fear, and what it really boils down to what does a organization need to do to make their customers, their employees, feel comfortable, and that they're safe and they're in the workplace, and then valued, that they're going to be able to do the work that they've been hired to do and they're compensated for. So piece of cake, right? Should be a super easy challenge for us to solve, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we talk about, a lot of it goes into this is the remote work challenges, right? And we started this project, if you want to call it that, or this process. We were at the very infancy of it before the COVID pandemic, and we were starting to see a big shift towards transition to remote workers from knowledge-based workers. We were also seeing companies who were more aggressive in that pursue this opportunity. I know, Nick, we've had lots of conversations about workforce transformation, right? As it existed prior to COVID, and then now fast forward in the middle of the movie, right? And so, what have you seen that we're trending this way prior to COVID that now has just been moved that much quicker?
Yeah, on these 3 points, collaboration is at the heart of productivity. This collaboration word has been used extensively over the last few years and is part of the lexicon, everybody working in workplace, and the virtual meetings being a part of that. I mean, the collaboration aspect, if you started talking about being able to share media or information, it was about co-located individuals sharing what they had on their particular devices onto a screen that was shared amongst them. And then adding in the notion of 1 or 2 people being absent as a result of geographical distance or some other need for them to be remote was part of it. But what's really flipped is now the people that are away from the shared space are outnumbering those in the shared space. And that really sort of flips the conversation on its head when you're talking about how do you make sure, as per this point 3, how do you make sure those that are not in the room have equal voice to those who are in the room? There's a ingrained advantage of face-to-face conversation between somebody beside you because the nuances you can read on their face and the very clear audio that our ears and mouths create and receive. How do you get the person that's on that video link to have that same sort of voice as the rest of the people that are in the room? And this is going to be one of the trickiest challenges in configuring these spaces going forward.
Well, and also, we talked about this in one of the earlier sessions, before the disadvantage was being remote, right? And because everyone is in the room and you were the one person remote, and now there might be 20 people on a call and 6 in a room. And is there a disadvantage that's created through the technology or the seating or the space that are going to not give equal equity to the people in the room that are remote? Because in a tile view they can see everybody. So I think that's something we really need to be considerate of when we're designing spaces and deploying technology. Another thing I had a note I wanted to bring up that you and I talked about before also was the fact that when somebody was absent from work, we expected them to be back in the next day or 2, right? Because you were at work to do your work. And now we're talking about because of childcare or restrictions in congregating or whatever that may be. I mean, we might be talking about having a remote meeting for 2 weeks at a minimum, right? Based on what's allowed. So a lot of considerations needs to go into that too.
Yeah, everything from communication on the space to how it works into the overall workflow of a project and how people communicate in between these meetings.
Yeah, and not taking for granted that if you don't say something in a meeting, you'll catch them in the hallway and be like, "Oh, hey, Nick, I wanted to double down on that." I think we need to be more deliberate in the meetings to make notes of those things. Just a lot of it's a lot of the things you take for granted, right? That we need to be deliberate now about replacing in a virtual meeting environment. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the next section here and just talk through the challenges for each of the, these 8 challenges that our teams have put together for us to talk through. And certainly there's more than 8 challenges when it comes to this transition and what we're defining as our new way to work. But these are the ones that we decided to go ahead and highlight for the purposes of this call. And so when we start with checking equipment, right? Again, this transition to a video connected workplace was in its infancy. Some companies had been aggressive with it. Within those companies, some departments had been aggressive with it. So there's the opportunity to have somewhat of a disparate experience across different buying centers for organizations. I know we certainly see that in the technology side, but what have you encountered on the furniture side and the layout side in an organization, and what consistency do we need to talk about there?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, the notion of video conferencing kind of being an afterthought to many of these spaces when looking at furniture considerations. So, the very simple example of the shape of a table, where a rectangular table would be fine for people meeting within a room facing each other, because that's just the way we're used to meeting. And having a screen at the front of the room so you can media share and information share on that. Anybody can pivot their chair out of the way to get a good view of that screen. It's not a problem. But what's happening now is, with the increased need for good video conferencing connected to these types of pieces of technology, that flow of information is now two-way, and the person who now pushes their chair back to take a look at the screen is going to be out of camera. So thinking a little bit more in depth about what the other people need on the other end of the camera is a really important thing when you're choosing your furniture for these types of spaces. The other thing that's really important, or what we've seen a lot of, is the diversification of these types of spaces outside of enclosed areas into more open plan, and creating furniture solutions that actually support these notions of open plan video sharing and media sharing and video conferencing capabilities that don't require the investment of full height walls.
Yeah, it's a great point. We've also had a couple customers that have really taken the advantage of the time of having empty offices to go in and do an audit and find out what they've got, who's bought what, and just get a good handle on, hey, we know we need to invest in this now. Where do we need to invest, and what have we already bought? And we've said this a long time, but the video conferencing world as it is, is reminiscent of network 30, 40 years ago, when everybody said, well, finance put in this small network. We need to know what they've got so we can put it through the whole organization. And so I think that's, the notion of all of a sudden we're having video everywhere. And we had a lot of customers prior to this too that said they'd never work remote, and so plan B, right, on how we do that. So.
Yeah, this notion of using offices that are not currently occupied reminds me of something that's been happening in the furniture workplace trend for a little while, and it's this notion of a flex office, where some person who's got a private office is often not there. And how do you double duty that office? And so that idea and that thinking has been put forth, and now, as you said, this is a really good opportunity to try and figure out, what do these spaces serve? What purpose do these spaces serve, and how can you make it do more now?
Mm-hmm. And in this topic, it goes back to that meeting equity, right? If you would care to elaborate on that from your point of view.
Yeah, you guys put this phrase forward, and I think it's a really clever one. I think it's the notion of one remote, all remote is, as soon as one person has diminished voice as a result of not being in this space, and that person might have something very valuable to add to the project, and it behooves everybody to try and make sure everybody's heard. So we talk a lot about what's needed within the workplace and what you can do within these meeting spaces, whether they're being within enclosed rooms or in the open plan. But just as important is what's happening at the person's other location, at their home. There's things there that you can control, and there's things that you cannot. You cannot ask a person to get an extra bedroom or an office that's got a closed door and completely sealed, and you have to take into accommodation that person might have a dog, and that dog might like barking. But there are things that you can control. Good ergonomically suited workstations, height adjustable tables, monitor stands, and laptop stands to get the camera at the correct height, so you're not having a down view to the underside of the person's chin. The ability to maybe offer them something to put in behind them so that they have a neutral background. You'll see in our studio here, we keep neutral backgrounds, but we also use these spaces so that we can sketch, because we're designing over video now. So these types of things for the remote worker are just as important as the things that you put within the shared spaces.
Well, and you've built your space to accommodate you. I can't pay attention to anything for longer than 3 minutes, so I have all these windows to look out here. So
I think we're talking about having a non-traffic zone in behind you, so that you don't have don't set it up in your kitchen counter, right? That's the main thing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, right before this call started, my pest control guy came and sprayed these windows right in front of the meeting here. So I was thankful that it ended before we got started. So
Perfect timing.
yeah. As far as rearranging the space, we've already started to talk to some people about on the technology, like how do we use the space we have differently now? I assume that you're spending a lot of time talking about that. That would seem to me as a conversation for furniture prior to technology, but.
Yeah. Again, the conversation's long and short term. What can you do in the short term to make things more conducive to disinfection? What can you do to, space people apart in their workstations? A lot of this has to do to the return to work plan and how you bring people back. Do you let people come back that have that need to come in, and then are they in that spot? But then how do you arrange the furniture to space them apart accordingly? That's something that we've been talking about quite a bit, again, enforcing that larger distance, and so to speak. Demountable walls, again, they seem to be an increasingly hot topic. And what we're finding, though, is that short-term versus long-term approach, people wanting to sort of hedge a little bit and look into small-scale experiments before they make any large furniture investments, and do the things that are, as you said, rearranging furniture in the short term so that they can take the assets they've got and place them more accordingly to today's need.
Yeah, we're seeing that on the technology side too. A lot of investigation of what the next steps should be, as far as nobody's wanting to jump in and say we're going to roll out 5,000 conference rooms, but we do have a lot of investigation and proof of concepting and that type of process right now. I think everybody knows they need to do something. It's just what, right, and how it fits the culture of the organization and that type of thing. And same thing with, as you're talking about furniture with video conferencing, we've seen, we started this, just prior to this, talking about how do we use non-traditional space for meetings and for video. How do we extend the work area out into a more comfortable seating area rather than huddling around a table? There's also.
Go ahead, sorry.
Go ahead.
Now, these approaches vary by organizations. Some organizations are, thinking they're going to be returning rather quickly and pushing for that. Other ones are letting them stay a lot longer. And that has a lot to do with what the organization feels, where they feel their magic comes from. And the co-location, if there's a real sort of quick desire to co-locate once again, then the impetus to try and experiment with these types of ideas, like what you just mentioned, and flipping the usage of enclosed spaces versus open spaces, that enclosed spaces are for individual work while open spaces are for meetings, is something that these organizations that are really invested in getting back into the office are toying with, at least, but entering cautiously so that they don't invest in a very large change in the short term that might not pay off.
Yeah, and technology has improved significantly in less than on that the ability to do an open meeting space like that, the noise cancellation technology. I think Cisco just acquired a company. They just posted that on all the tech sites a couple weeks ago that was all about that. And Poly's got some amazing technology around. You've seen the video of a guy running a vacuum cleaner in the back of the room and not being able to hear it in the video call like that. That's magic, right?
No kidding.
We thought was possible not that long ago.
Yeah, those would be key additives to this solution.
Yeah, and the ability to do that. So, and then as we talk about moving in spaces and people moving around spaces and shared spaces, right? Our customers are talking to us about no touch, right? Like, how do we use technology to not have to touch something? So can I use my own laptop to start the meeting? Can I use my own phone or iPad to dial in or connect or transfer the call in? And again, there's been a lot of advances in that. And in the voice technology too. We've been working with a couple manufacturers of voice to really make those useful tools for you. But it's hard to not touch a chair or a table if you're going into a meeting. So what are you doing on that side?
Yeah, just on the tech-related table thing, one of the things that I know that has been part of the mix for a little while is the notion of a height-adjustable table that goes to your height with the Bluetooth. That's kind of an interesting aside, but with regards to how to reduce those surfaces or make those places easier to clean. Reduction of surfaces that don't need to be there. So for example, if you can make this a standing meeting room and removing those chairs, those are very high touch surfaces with many intricate sort of joints and details that would be difficult to clean. So we've heard of people removing those in places. Another thing that just came to mind is a lot of talk about ownership of shared spaces, breakout spaces, meeting spaces. I mean, how spaces are booked might start to change. We've seen some evidence of that, so that not everybody in the organization can book that meeting room that's immediately proximal to your working group space. Is that might become something that's for the use of the people within that space, and thus they can take the ownership of cleaning it as they're there and know that, you know, everybody in this team is taking responsibility for making their little shared space is safe and clean.
Mm-hmm. How does it impact surfaces as far as, you know, I'm sure you designed them with the intent to be cleaned once a week, right? With disinfectants and that. I mean, does that have any impact on the surface moving forward?
Well, this has been a big thing in the seating work that we've been working on for some time now. And it's, of course, you know, we're getting there's a lot of knowledge that we've gathered in the healthcare area that's come into the general workspace now. But the notion of fabrics that can be cleaned repeatedly and what that does to fabrics, sooner or later, they're going to degrade or wear down. Every surface does, especially if you're using an improper concentration of cleaning chemical, which is often the case because people are often under the misconception that, you know, using the undiluted cleaner is going to be better than using the proper dilution, and subsequently wears down surfaces more quickly. So we have to prepare not only for the ability to clean the surfaces, but how do we make designs that are have aspects that are high touch and high cleaning replaceable, so that you're not losing the investment in the whole piece of furniture, just in the part that needs to be replaced more often as a result of higher wear and tear on that section. An example of that would be upholstery covers, like upholstery covers, for example, being field replaceable is something that we've seen a lot of, you know, beneficial results from.
Yeah, we've seen along that line too. We've had customers talk to us, you know, and asked if we could develop around it, and the answer was yes, but we haven't moved forward with it yet. As being able to use voice commands to ask, has this room been used since it was cleaned? Anyway, has this room been used since it was cleaned, and when was the last time, and actually trying to make some of the voice capabilities relevant in this scenario as well. So I think voice is a big untapped area, but I can see it around this cleaning too.
Immensely useful.
Yeah. You know, as we, again, moving through this transition and how it affects the workforce, support's got to be a huge portion on this, and making sure that our techs are trained to support the meetings. I guess we hadn't talked about this before, but you know, we said a few times we have the luxury in a meeting space of being able to send somebody to the room to clean, but as we're talking about occupancy in a room and infectious disease control and all those things, like I just thought of, I don't know if I want to send somebody to the room to clean and add one more person. I need to be able to prep my teams to be able to clean the room remote and make sure test the room remote, troubleshoot remote, and not have to get into space too. So that's something that just occurred to me.
Yeah, just I don't have, being a furniture guy on the IT side, I can say my only experience here is that I am the unofficial IT person for my company and also for my family, including my parents, and can attest to the difficulty in diagnosing and troubleshooting remote IT problems versus in person. So extra preparation, communication channels and tools and methods to help people who are not, you know, immediately in your vicinity is obviously going to be a big part of what you guys are facing. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, and just the different systems that we're dealing with now. We had the big three, right? Before all this, we had Microsoft Teams, WebEx, and then Zoom, you know, popped into the middle of it. And now you supported whatever your organization used, right? So, hey, we're a Cisco WebEx environment. We're going to use WebEx. I need to know about that. And now everybody has a different, you know, every company now has made a decision quickly. And so a lot of our tech support guys are like, okay, well, we're a WebEx shop, but we got to support Zoom and Microsoft Teams because we have our partners that are calling in and talking to us or scheduling meetings in that platform. And so we have to learn about the different support platforms that we need to take into consideration, as well as virtual, right? And helping people on the far end with this as well.
Yeah, we as consultants, independents, have had to deal with that for a few years now, not only on video conferencing, but also on file sharing. So, you know, having a box versus a Dropbox versus a Google Drive versus a OneDrive account, and being able to accommodate all those different things is going to be something that I feel more organizations have to deal with. And also like permissions, and certain organizations allowed to use certain platforms and others not.
Right. Well, and taking for granted that because I can share it within my organization, it'll work, and then I try to share it out to a vendor, or partner, or customer, then
Yep.
I can't. So yeah, we've dealt with that too.
Yeah.
So this one has been a hot one for us. Everybody has an idea of what we think we need to do with this, but what have you seen from, I mean, tracking occupancy for efficiency standpoint? It's probably been something that you've dealt with for a long time in the furniture market, not for infectious disease control.
No, this is a new wrinkle, and some of the challenges from before remain, and other challenges are new. I mean, before, what we were looking at were skeptical large clients trying to figure out if their open plan collaborative spaces were actually being utilized. They're trying to determine if their investment in the furniture was worth it, if people are actually using these spaces to great effect. So we worked in trying to create occupancy tracking for that. What we found is that, you know, the technology for tracking desk usage is very good. I mean, you put your knees underneath the desk, you put a motion sensor there, and you've got an absolute, you know, perfect reading. You know when somebody's there and when they're not. Also, using enclosed meeting rooms has been, you know, well figured out for a while, whether the occupancy is underneath the shared table or whether it's at the door. You can get a good feeling for it. Both of these methods of occupancy tracking were very useful because they gave you reliable results, but at the same time, the data was anonymous, so people didn't feel like they were being watched, so there's not cameras all over their heads and whatnot. We've had less success with open plan collaborative spaces. Any technology that we've looked into that is used, you know, we've even fiddled with technology used for actually tracking occupancy, livestock occupancy, by, you know, sensing vibrations through the furniture. And we haven't been able to try and figure out how to do that effectively so that it doesn't make any mistakes. The other thing that's a bit of a wrinkle now, though, is if you're trying to track occupancy because you want to extend it to contact tracing, the really important ingredient that was there before, insisted upon by not only the employees but the employers, was the anonymity of it. And so how do you get around that hurdle? I'm not really 100% sure at this point.
Yeah. Well, the other part is the accuracy, right? You mentioned we need a reliable number, but if we're talking about deciding if a room was utilized, right? The dependability, right? The accuracy of that number is not quite as important as it is in the context of exactly how many people were in the room. Was the room vacated completely before somebody else came in? You know, those types of, especially when you talk about contact tracing. And you know, we've been working with manufacturers of technology for years now on it for the same reasons as I mentioned before. Everybody wants to know if their meeting spaces are being used and how efficiently and effectively they're being used. And so we've talked to manufacturers of sensors, and we started to develop some sensors a couple of years ago to measure the carbon dioxide in the room, so we could get an idea of how many people we thought were in the room based on you know, the level in the room. A lot of the, you know, Cisco started with it, and the other manufacturers of the endpoints are following suit now, it seems, is using the hardware as a sensor, you know, the microphone, the speaker, the cameras in the system itself as a sensor to note if somebody was in the room. And at the time, it was intended so that when you walked in, the system would come on and you wouldn't waste that 10 seconds of uncertainty of turning the system on. And now it's to know if somebody is hiding and sitting in the room using it when they is supposed to be clean and clear. And so that using the technology that's already there to track occupancy is something that I think we're going to double and triple down on from a industry to utilize that.
It sounds like it has promise.
Yeah. So far, we'll see. This is another big one. We talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the call, of the culture of take for granted you're going to be able to see your peers and chat and, you know, have a couple minutes of private time maybe to say hey to your boss and build some rapport there. All those, you know, just behaviors that we took for granted now we really need to be deliberate about, right? As we return to work currently.
I think the social aspect of this conversation is probably the most interesting one. I mean, there's also data that we're seeing, and it's surprisingly worldwide. But there's a few trends that we're already seeing with regards to how meetings are held. We're finding that there's a higher frequency of meetings, that they are have a larger number of attendees each because they're no longer bound by the physical constraints of the size of a meeting room. Those fairly predictable, and I sort of add to it is that the data is suggesting that the length of meetings is getting shorter. So that's an interesting thing to add to the mix. So it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. But the conversation that we've been having that I think is most interesting is that adding structure to things that were previously unstructured, and specifically with regards to social interactions within the workplace. I mean, many of us are thirsting for contact, and what was easy and as just walking by somebody's desk saying, do you want to go for a coffee, is now turned into something that perhaps, at least for the short term, we have to make this conscious effort to add increased structure to creating social connections using these venues. It's a little bit sort of awkward at first, the notion of scheduling a Zoom call to have something that's not strictly work related, but we've seen many examples of great success to this end. And I have a feeling these trends with regards to project related meetings and also social related meetings will become normalized and a little bit more smooth and easier and effortless as time goes on.
Yeah, well, it won't be weird, right? I mean, it was weird for a lot of people to have their camera on 6 months ago, and now now they're the camera police. So that's an interesting transition. I think one of the things it came up in a call last night that I had at the very end of the day, and I was talking to that guy, and he said, I haven't gotten up out of my chair for 4 hours. I've been sitting here staring at my screen, right? Because you don't have a natural transition from one space to another to grab a glass of water, to use the restroom, and you stack meetings up, right? Like, so being aware that you need to give yourself some time to stretch and move around and like, now we do have standing high desks, so we could just march in place, I suppose, but that's probably defeats the purpose a little bit from a culture standpoint.
This forcing yourself to move thing, we have to find new ways to do everything, right? We just figured out how to force ourselves to move within the workplace. The standing height meeting, the standing height desk was one thing, but we also have spent a great amount of effort and time in developing contract furniture that allows occupants within campuses and offices to choose the type of space that they're going to work in, to get them up out of their desk. They have a couch that has got that comfort factor, but a usable surface that they can type on. So these different types of venues for different types of work. The focused data crunching is at the desk. Well, maybe firing off a few emails before a meeting is in some sort of soft seating section in some close proximity to that, that meeting space. So trying to find, new ways within a more constrained, in some cases, much more constrained floor plate. And how do you schedule meetings in such a way that you're not doing a 13-hour, or a 10-hour sitting marathon in meetings? At 13 hours, I know sounds crazy, but my wife did one recently. So how do we get around that? I'm a big fan of vinyl records, and I find vinyl records are very good for that, because every 20 minutes you hear the bumping and scratching, and it makes you get up, or it drives you crazy, right?
Yeah. Just the getting up and moving around on a schedule is something different to think about, another thing we take for granted. But there's a lot of things that are going to change in this return to work and new strategy. And I think just working from home, I own a technology company, right? And I worked from home when I've had to, sick kid, contractor coming to the house, something like that. And until this, I had never followed the best practices of setting up a designated place to work, having the work tools you need to perform your job, and all the things we talk about and what it takes. And so as the leader of the organization, like, I didn't have a great grasp on how productive people could be from home, because I wasn't personally following the best practices of doing the things that that I know you're supposed to do, because I was just lazy about it. I'll just sit at the kitchen counter and do this call, and if it gets loud, I'll go outside and it'll be fine. And so
it's the shoemaker's child, right? Like the notion of the shoemaker's child going through this. Don't be too hard on yourself. I've seen some people who own furniture distribution companies sitting in old wooden chairs, with like terrible posture. So it's again like this change in venue is forcing people or getting people into this mode.
Well, I'm just thankful that Technion saw enough value in me that I got a desk at one point for a deal, and I'm not sitting
Nice.
Indian style on the floor right now doing this call. So thanks, Technion. Anyway, as we wrap up this section, is there anything else you want to add? That I can't think of anything we haven't covered that we talked about previously, but.
Yeah, I think this is just the summation slide. I think we've covered it, and I'm sure there's going to be some further questions in the next section here.
Okay. Yeah, and so we'll just get on after this. We'll move on to the Q&A section. Dan, if you've got anything you want to move on, bring up to the table.
Let's go right to the Q&A. So one question that came in. So are work environments essentially moving away from the shared space trend, or how do you guys see the future of the shared space?
These questions, I think, when I get questions that are like this, that are big questions in a certain way, I think the smartest thing I can say is I don't know. But when this first happened, my first impression was, wow, everything's going to be going to no fixed address because we're going to have lower occupancy within the workplace, and subsequently, how do you make low occupancy, spaces more efficient? And you'd be looking at, if only 25 or 30 or 40% of the workforce is in the office, then you've basically got a 60% wasted desk rate. So obviously things are going to go into fixed address. And then the concerns started coming up with regards to the surfaces, and we started getting information as to, this is airborne, but are the surfaces something that cause infection? So nobody's going to want to sit at a no fixed address that they don't know has been cleaned or has been sat at before. It's now going to be fixed address. And now the information keeps on evolving. So it keeps on going back and forth with regards to how we're going to have shared spaces allotted within the workplace. If I were to sort of take a stab at it, I don't think they're going away. I do think they're probably going to increase over time. And any answer to this end, you have to sort of look at what is likely a pre-widespread sort of abatement to COVID answer, and then what happens in the post. I think maybe that these shared spaces in the short term are going to be seeing a downtrend, but in the long term, I imagine the empowerment that remote collaboration technologies such as what we're talking about here are going to allow people to stay home because their kid's sick, or because they're sick, or because their car is being worked on, and subsequently these shared spaces connecting to these remote spaces is going to be an uptrend thing over the long term.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the management of the shared space, which is something that we never really concerned ourselves with significantly prior to this, is going to be something that we shine a lot of light on. We've also had several customers tell us that they believe that their vision of their commercial real estate is going to be more of a conference center and all shared workspace and very, very little dedicated, because the 2, 3, even 5-person meeting now is on some platform, WebEx, Teams, Zoom, whatever it may be. It's the more important big meeting that we're bringing people together that we want to have the dedicated space for. And we want everybody to be able to do their work and prep for that accordingly and participate at a certain level. So I think it'll be interesting to see how each industry and each business decides to address it. We did have a quote I thought was really good from one of our partners was, I was talking to him and he was referencing a conversation with his facilities director, and his comment was, we need to figure out how we're going to make commercial real estate compare to being at home. How is it going to be better to be at work, and why do we come to work rather than work from home? So I think there's a lot to
the clients I've spoken to this end cite 2 major reasons that, above all else, where people are going to be coming in. It's this interpersonal camaraderie, or the synergies that you can get from the sophisticated interactions that you can have face-to-face that are more difficult to duplicate. And the second one is access to specialized equipment or services at the actual workplace. We're a very small example of that. Our firm is 4 people with contractors coming in, and we have a 1,500 square foot office, the meeting space in which I'm sitting in, a little workshop space, and then the workstation space. And every time I look over at that workstation space, I see a woeful underutilization of this now. But I'm thinking, do we ever need to go back? And how do we equip our team with the correct IT so that they can choose to work remotely versus in space and only come in when they need to use the shop to build that prototype? Now, there's other considerations that come with that, but it's something that we're toying with, and it's definitely going to be something we're considering at the end of our commercial lease.
Yeah. Yeah. What else you got, Dan?
So with everybody going digital, as you guys said, folks kind of glued to their office chair for 4 or 5 hours at a time. Is the future of technology going to be like smartwatches, where our meeting platform is going to tell us it's time to move or relocate, try someplace new?
Yes. Right? Like every technology wants to, every platform wants to be more and more relevant in your life. So if the meeting platform starts to get its hooks into other parts of your world, right? Like that's ideal. Um, I don't know, Nick, how have you seen the furniture uh, world kind of go down that? Like, does your chair remind you it's time to go for a walk? Or?
Mine doesn't personally. Yeah, and I suppose that could be incorporated into it. I think that any sort of technological solution that might be implemented needs to be supported by some sort of company sort of policy, perhaps. Like I think of, not so furniture related, but my mind wanders. If we in fact are having more meetings, but they're tending to be shorter, and we're talking about 45-minute meetings instead of 1-hour meetings, maybe there's technological solutions in the form of restrictions on booking platforms and not being able to book the last quarter hour of any given hour, and these types of things that might come in, as well as these reminder things. But yeah, I think it has to be sort of like the tech is there to help, the policy is there to set the sort of instructions, so to speak.
Yeah, I could see though on in your personal preferences, right? Like I think that's a great idea. Those reminders, like, do you really want to schedule this for the whole hour? Or do you want to give yourself 10 minutes? Can you do it in 50 so you can give yourself 10 minutes? Like that's be a great quality of life adjustment maybe for a platform. So yeah,
pre to this happening, these types of reminders and sort of tools were available for ergonomic considerations to help people, make sure that they're not keyboarding too long, or that they're not going to be getting repetitive strain injury, et cetera, et cetera. So I've heard results where they've been implemented well and people love them, and then other times where they said, no, this is driving me crazy. My keyboard locks me out every 20 minutes and I can't get my work done. So I mean, again, it's how it's rolled out, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, guys. What about any recommendations for educators or those in the education, or anything unique that maybe we haven't talked about that would apply to them?
Yeah. If you want to start, Aaron, I could spout on this for a bit.
Yeah, it was breaking up a bit on my end on the education industry. Was that the question specific to that? Yeah. Further considerations specific to education. So we just did a project in New York and deployed 160 endpoints for a large private school. And the considerations that they wanted us to take into account were they wanted a mobile solution in the room so that they could move it around, so they could rearrange students and how they were sitting and working, and allowed remote students to participate with different groups. Privacy is a big thing that we've heard from a lot of our educational customers on concern on just really it's not a limitation necessarily the technology or the space, but just what is the actual law and rule around who can be on camera and whose voices can be heard, and how, if we're transmitting that out, what does that look like from a legal and liability standpoint? We talked to one school that was going to give their teachers all earbuds, like Apple earbuds, so that they could hear the remote students and the students could hear them clearly, but you wouldn't hear necessarily what other people were hearing in the classroom. A lot of that goes back to culture too, right? Some schools that we talked to wanted everything in the classroom. They put the camera in the back of the room, and shined the whole room. We used presenter tracking technology to follow the teacher around as they moved, and others did not want any of the classroom participants to be on camera or on audio. So there's a lot of tools. I mean, we talked to that one school that I talked about about the earbuds from Apple. We talked for 45 minutes about how we keep audio, and it just clicked at some point. It's like, well, why don't we just use Bluetooth earbuds, right? Like that solves the problem. Like, oh yeah, problem solved for $99 or whatever they cost, right? Instead of building something. So anyway, what have you seen?
Well, I've got sort of a two-pronged thing here. Is one's personal experience and one's from product development. But in relation to your AirPods anecdote, that's we were talking about equal voice inside and outside of the room, and I can't see a place where this is more important. This consideration is more important than education. Because of very sort of stringent policies with regards to no tolerances on cough, sniffles, or fevers. We're going to have a really complicated mix of kids inside the classroom and kids outside of the classroom. And those kids outside of the classroom, need to be granted equal access to learn as those who are in the classroom. So conscious effort on the part of teachers is going to be a really important thing here. But some of these children might be timid and not be able to speak up like somebody in a meeting. These are really important things, especially when it comes to learning, and that we don't, certain kids don't fall behind because they've got a 2-week hiatus from school because of the need to be at home as a result of a fever, for example. On the product development perspective, we have been doing more work in higher education than K through 12. And some of the things that we've been developing and wrapping into our products were pertinent before and are now doubly pertinent now. The notion of, as I mentioned before, reskinning upholstery on site and not having to have soft seating upholsterers, not throwing out the whole couch, for example, the whole chair as a result of some sort of tear in the fabric. Higher education is a hard, rough and tumble context. Lots of, rips and tears and vandalism, and how do you actually replace for that type of thing also comes into this now increased and more stringent cleaning protocol that's going to cause the fabrics and vinyls to wear out more quickly. And developing products that can be field maintained is now more important than ever.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Something else that came in seems like more of a comment than a question, but apparently Google does have meetings that cut 4 minutes off the meetings automatically. So they're trying to get you, that 5 minutes back in your life that you can stand up and stretch.
Yeah,
it's kind of like Netflix asking you if you're still watching. One other question that came in. Obviously, 6 months ago, preparing for today would have been quite a roller coaster. So what advice do you have for people that are trying to plan for the next 6 months, knowing that we don't know what's going to happen?
Well, what we're seeing right now is that most large organizations are spending their time and putting their focus on what their platform is going to be that they're going to use to move forward. And then they are planning to make decisions on physical technology in the spaces after they make that decision. I think that some organizations maybe are letting perfect get in the way of good enough. And you don't have to outfit every place, but there are some key places that could stand to be done. And I told my son this story the other day. We've all seen a smashed squirrel because he just didn't decide which way to go on the road, right? Sometimes in life and in business, you just have to make a decision and run with it. And there's a ton of information that's constantly changing. So, those are my observations of what is going to happen in the next 6 months.
Yeah, when we're dealing with uncertainty, and something that I've advised people do, it's not hard to do. I literally learned how to do it off of reading a Wired magazine article. So I'm probably not an expert at it, but the notion of scenario planning, just take a look at it. The notion of variables in with regards to duration of infection and severity of infection, and try to create 4 possible futures in which you're taking a look at these different things that could happen as a result of changing variables. And then if you can create solutions for your workspace or for your life or whatever you're planning for that, you know, covers more of those quadrants than others, then you've got this idea of this contingency or hedging that you can deal with. That's just a general sort of planning tool. If you look that up, we found it useful, not only in advisor and clients, but also planning what we're going to do with our business. With regards to if you're somebody who's responsible for deploying or outfitting a space with furniture, the suggestion is pilot, test, you know, start small, do something. Feedback. Yeah, get feedback, see how it works. Don't jump in with both feet into something that, you know, right away. Like, just give it a shot and figure it out on a smaller scale before you roll it wild. But give it a shot quickly. You know, as you said, Aaron, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You know, get something good in there now, see how it works, then tweak it, rather than try to perfect it on a drawing board and then implement it in one grand sweep.
Yeah, I think experience, right? Some of our employees that were the most against working remote or having members of their team work remote are the biggest fans of it in our organization now, and no level of talking or attempting to convince would have made that point, right? It's and they're more effective now, right? So not only do they like it, they're turning out a better quality of work because they're not distracted, they're in their own space, all those things that before, until you experience it, you don't know. So concept, try it, get feedback, learn that way. So
yeah.
Well, John,
I like the design process.
I believe that's our last question, unless anybody has anything they haven't dropped into the chat yet. If not, we can, you know, quote, make it a speedy meeting and give everybody a few minutes back in their day.
Yeah, give everybody 5 minutes back. Yeah, everybody can get up and walk around. So, Nick, always great to hang out with you. I'm glad we decided to do this, so I got to have some time together since we generally only see each other at conferences and
yeah, we missed it this year. Thanks for inviting me, and much appreciate it. I enjoyed being part of it.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Appreciate it, and we'll follow up to the attendees with the recording, right, Dan, or a link to it, something like that.
Correct. Hopefully in the next 2 or 3 days or so.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks again.